You're listening to Leadership Recalibrated, where we dismantle outdated leadership playbooks and explore the new way to lead. I'm Lori Lalonde, founder of Her Executive Ascent, and I created this podcast because I was tired of hearing the same recycled advice about what it takes to be a good leader. You know the scripts: be more confident, lean in, develop executive presence. But what if those scripts were written for a leadership model that no longer works? What if the future of leadership looks less like commanding authority and more like strategic influence, emotional intelligence, and authentic power? Each week, we take on the questions most leadership programs avoid, the power dynamics nobody teaches, and the decisions that actually shape your career. This is where you stop following the old rules and start designing the leadership career that fits who you are now and where you're going next. Let's recalibrate. Welcome to Leadership Recalibrated, a leadership insight series by Her Executive Ascent. I'm Lori Lalonde, CEO and founder of Her Executive Ascent. The hiring process is sending signals to women long before the first interview. In the job posting, in the salary conversation, in how flexibility is or is not mentioned, in whether the company's culture is visible at all. Women are reading every one of those signals and making decisions based on what they find, or more often, what they don't. Today's guest sits at the center of it all. Alexandra Tillo has spent nearly a decade at Indeed, one of the world's largest hiring platforms, working across enterprise national accounts with some of Canada's biggest employers, before stepping into her current role as Senior Talent Marketing Consultant, where she bridges the gap between employers and job seekers through thought leadership, keynote presentations, industry events, and research. Before Indeed, she built her career at Oracle managing enterprise and mid-market accounts across Eastern Canada. She has a front row seat to the data, the trends, and the patterns that most employers are not paying close enough attention to. And what that data says about women in the Canadian workforce right now is something every leader and every job seeker in this audience needs to hear. Let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast today, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you for having me today.
Before we get started into the questions, if you can just give me a quick backstory about your experience and where you're at today.
So I'm currently working at Indeed. I've been working at Indeed actually for the last 10 years almost now. My role and what I specialized on is thought leadership topics on HR and talent acquisition. I speak at conferences, I do podcast, radio, articles, and I also talk at conferences. I'm meeting HR leaders, talent acquisition leaders, just really trying to connect the dots between employers and job seekers. I'm sitting in the middle of it all, and hopefully I can facilitate some of the exchange and for employers as well to really understand the reality of the market. I think that's really important. Sometimes that's where the gap is. And so hopefully my role is helping bridging that gap.
Amazing. You must be so busy. Everyone knows Indeed. Everybody knows the brand and what they do. And you sit at the center of how millions of people find work every day. So, from that point, that viewpoint that you have, what does the hiring landscape look like right now, specifically for women?
Yes. And thank you so much for bringing me for the woman topic. First of all, I wanted to say I do feel concerned by it. So really appreciate that. And I feel that it's sometimes a topic that's being overlooked, or we're just trying, to put everyone in the same basket. Regarding the hiring landscape for women right now, I would say it's a mix of progress and friction. And I would say that friction is pretty persistent. What has changed and what we're observing is that women today are way more intentional about what they want to who they want to work with and what they want to do at work. Compensation, I want to talk about it because it still matters, very, very much. Actually, I can cite a source with Indeed. We did make a report on women at the workplace, and we have 86% of Canadian women who cite salary as important, but it's no longer the deciding factor. And I think that's something that's very interesting here. What we're hearing from women in Canada is that the priority is not placed on work-life balance is the number one, then it followed by job security, and then with the culture, like a positive work culture. So what we're seeing is that women, they're not just evaluating a job anymore. They're like evaluating the whole system. They're asking new questions like about career progression. Do I see myself in, growing there? Is the pay is sounds fair? Can I actually sustain my life if I were to work for this company? So, at the same time, we have many women that still feel that the workplace wasn't really originally created or designed with them, women in mind. And actually, we had 38% of women who are satisfied with steps their own organization is taking in closing the pay gap. And there's two-fifths of women who say it's still easier for men to progress in their career. And we're in 2026, right? So the conversation has evolved beyond, simply for companies saying, getting women hired in the company. The real challenge for them is creating workplace where women can grow, women can stay, and they can actually lead in the company.
Yeah, and do you see I mean, those are all fantastic insights and definitely what we are seeing today, and especially with some of the rollback of some of the workplace flexibility and how that's impacting women in the workplace. So, with these new kind of set of priorities that women have, and I shouldn't say new because we've always had those priorities. I
Yeah.
think we are at a position now where we feel that that has to be the driving force for whether or not we, accept an offer with a company or not. Whereas
Right.
before there were things that we would do to, compensate, right? We would compromise so much of ourselves in order to fit into the mold. And now I think women are finally at a point to say no more. Fitting
Yes.
into the mold, I need, more flexibility and a bit more intention around developing women. So when you see women going through that process and having those expectations, do you see companies adapting to that? And especially as they go through the hiring process, are they being intentional about positioning themselves in a favorable way for women?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I love the question. Everything you said is so true as well. I want to highlight this is not news. I think it's just that we're being more vocal about it and maybe a bit more comfortable at sharing as well, what we feel, what we deserve, first of all, and just being a bit more clear in our intention. And you're right, right? When we look at that from the lens of employers, I do see that there's some breakdown sometimes that happens, when trying to hire women. And we do see that even before like the interview starts. When companies they're focusing on the final hiring decisions, the biggest barrier for women are usually much earlier than even being interviewed. They will look at the job posting and they will look at, am I feeling represented in the job posting? Is it talking at me? Can I see myself through here? I mentioned the salary just earlier. Like, is there the salary on the job? Is the company transparent about it? The flexibility piece that you just mentioned a minute ago, is it clear in the posting as well? And I was mentioning culture as well. Does this company, from what I'm reading, maybe even reviews, I'm going on Indeed, I'm going on Glassdoor, other sites to kind of learn what the culture is. Does it feel safe, like psychologically safe for me to work there? So women actually tend to what I call select out of opportunities all the time when some of those signals, if not all, are missing. And that happened more often than not. And the issue is then later in the process that confidence gap and structural bias is still showing up. For example, we mentioned salary, but what about promotion, getting promoted? I'm trying to remember about all the statistics that we have. I think it's 30, I'm pretty sure it's 31% of Canadian women that say they're still uncomfortable asking for promotion. And when we look at generations and we look at Gen Z women, we're up to 42% of women that feel uncomfortable asking for promotion. It's huge, it should
Yeah.
not be that high. So that matters because hiring on one hand and advancement like promotion on the other end, they should not be separate conversation, and they are. The same workplace dynamics that affects promotion also affects interviewing, salary negotiation, and women's visibility during the recruitment process. So, for me, some of that break that we were mentioning, it's not just happening at a single stage, but it's more the trust that kind of leaks at every single stage of the hiring process.
Wow. I never thought to tie in the way that the company, has devised their hiring process ties
Mhm.
into that could be an indicator of, like how they handle promotions even and how they support the candidates as they come in, whether they're men or women. But what are
Right.
some tells? Do you have information on maybe what kind of indicators present themselves in that hiring process that maybe women could think to ask more questions about, dig deeper about before they make that decision?
Yeah, 100%. It's a great question. I would say any stage, right? Let's be
Yeah.
honest. But obviously, the earliest stages are incredibly important. So, one thing we consistently, I want to stress on that, is that the transparency piece strongly affects whether women even apply in the first place. We've had pay transparency laws, right? Throughout Canada, there's some provinces that, it's actually a law. Some others, gonna follow soon. But even with that law, you actually research it. We have 74% of Canadian women that say they want transparency around salary, around pay to be implemented, to really feel that trust early stages. Actually, just a note on that, if employers are listening to us, a salary bends actually ranked the most recognized type of pay transparency women believe that would really close the gender pay gap, because you have different ways of talking about salary, and the bands are what woman sees, that she feels more trust towards the company. I thought that was important to mention. But I was mentioning the job posting before, and that's what the early stage is really important. When we see a job posting, when I say we, I mean as women, that's very vague, intentionally vague sometimes, or just completely forgot to talk about compensation, flexibility, or even growth. Many women will completely opt out, like right off the bat. And then further along, when they go through the pipeline, if ever they had applied, the negotiation dynamics become another challenge. I was talking about promotion. We actually have less than half of Canadian women who have ever asked for a raise, ever. And most of them say they feel very uncomfortable asking for more money. So there's a real barrier there, a real challenge there when we compare with men, for example. What surprised me the most in some of the data I was able to gather from Indeed and researches we did is when women were actually going through that discussion, that negotiation of increase, raise, 80% were successful of getting it. So see, what it tells me when I think about it is that the issue, it's not the capability of women to have that discussion. It's whether workplace themselves, companies themselves, creates an environment where women feel safe advocating for themselves in the first place. I think it's very important to mention that. We say 80% are successful when they have the conversation, but not even half of them feel they can ask for it.
I want to pause here for a moment and reiterate what Alexandra just mentioned. 80% of women who ask for a raise actually get the raise, yet less than half of women have ever asked for one. That is not a capability issue, it's a confidence and safety issue. And that is exactly why I built Her Executive Ascent and the programs within it, because I want to give women the space, support, and skills that they need to rewrite the narrative that they've been operating from. The conditioning that tells women to put their head down, do good work, and wait to be rewarded does not untangle itself on its own. It takes intentional work with the right community and the tools to succeed. If that resonates with where you are at right now, visit herexecutiveascent.com to learn more. Now, back to Alexandra.
Huge discrepancy.
But that's fair. And I can see that in hindsight. I
Yeah.
was more comfortable asking for a promotion because the promotion denoted the salary increase, but not a salary increase in the same role. In order to give myself a salary increase, I would just go to another job. But it was also for building additional skills. Like I didn't just leave because of salary, but that was something. we weren't taught. We were taught, put your head down, you do good work, you don't ruffle any feathers, and you will be rewarded. So that is something real that women have to work to untangle that training or that learning that we had since we were very little. So
Yes.
very
That's
interesting.
For sure, Lori, that's embedded.
Yeah.
And again, like they're successful when doing it, you know? So I think it's a lot of, to your point, that's a lot of psychological safety, like feeling like I can actually have those conversations. I am worth of having those conversations. It starts really early on as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. And companies have a huge play in it. If a company makes you comfortable doing it, if you have a manager, for example, do you have those regular conversation with, then encourage your people to do it. The more you lead by example, the more your employees will feel comfortable following you, right? So I think it really starts as well. Company needs to maybe be the first, to say it's okay. And we actually want to have those conversation with you.
Well, yes. I've actually been on leadership teams where we've done a regular salary review to make sure that there was parity
Mhm.
across the pay between the men and the women on the teams. And it was shocking to see the difference. But it was only because leadership was intentional about saying we want to close the gap that we would have those discussions and then make decisions to bring the women's salary closer to, what the average was because a lot of them were underpaid, and it's just it's so built in through various reasons, right? Bias and what women will accept because most women don't negotiate in the interview. Like when they get the job, they're worried about asking for more because they think they'll lose the offer. And so there's so many stages at which we need to learn to also advocate our value and our worth and understand even the value of what we're bringing into the role. So
Mhm.
I think with job postings, it's very interesting because I feel that way just, I'm not looking for work, but I do keep on top of the job postings regularly to see what are the trends about what companies are asking for and the salary trends and things like that. And right now, because so many companies are voluntarily putting in their pay bands, I find when the pay band isn't there, that makes me feel some sort of way. Like I feel like they're hiding the salary for a reason. They're not saying it.
Mhm.
They're not listing it or being open about it for a reason, and then that immediately builds the distrust.
Exactly. It almost sounds like suspicious. Why?
Yes.
Why are they not communicating about it? And the trust piece is everything,
Yeah.
everything to every stages I was mentioning before. Is just to your point. You're just reading a job right now. You mentioned you're not applying. You're just reading, and already you have a bit of a negative perception. You know what I'm saying? And you have so much knowledge, so much skills, so much experience, and you are questioning already the company, for not being transparent. So I imagine their own employees, it's like what perception you want to give about yourself as well. I do feel it's an employer branding play as well for companies. Like who are you? How do you want to be perceived? I think every company wants the job seeker or their employee to trust them, right? But it starts even before the first interview. To your point, we're just reading a job right now, a job description, a job ad, and I'm already have some concerns about the company. So the very early stages, the trust needs to be built, especially for women to apply to a company.
Yeah. And even in the job posting, like the description itself as far as the responsibilities and what the expectation is, I find that there is concern there because we're seeing the responsibilities list growing and growing and growing. And when you're reading it, you feel like this sounds like 3 jobs in one. And I've been testing it out by taking random job postings like that and putting it into Claude and saying, highlight the red flags and green flags in this job posting. What's bad and what's good about it, right? And so many of the job postings, like Claude will come back and say, this sounds like a manager, a director, a VP, and a compliance officer all in one. Proceed with caution. Or it will identify, oh, they're asking for senior level skills, but the role and the pay band are not senior level. And so it really is interesting now with AI that women can do this because I'm doing it, just to
Mhm.
kind of see, is it just me that thinks this is unreasonable? And when I see that, then that gives me concern of, if I were to apply, I wouldn't apply to those jobs where I'm like, I don't want to do 4 jobs in one and get paid for one job. And it's
Yeah.
usually the lowest paying job of the 4. Right? I think AI is going to enable a lot of people to really evaluate these job postings in that way,
Mhm.
to understand, is this something I really want to get myself into? And I can tell you that for companies I've worked at in the past where I've done that, where I've taken the job posting and pasted it in, the assessment it provided was pretty accurate. So if it was a really reasonable posting with great salary, I mean, it was good. It was very complimentary, and it identified it as a company where they likely support your growth and your learning and all this stuff. And it was like, yep, that tracks. And then where I there was not the same experience at another company where it just felt like you were doing everything and just nothing seemed to, translate as far as promotability or salary increase, and budgets were tight, and, resources were thin. It
Yeah.
identified that. And I was like, it gave me an assessment that from my experiences was accurate for the companies I've worked at. So now it's like, if I ever do go back into the workforce, I'm totally going to do this, to evaluate these companies to see if that job posting is something that I can be set up for success and not set up for failure. And I think women are more sensitive to that, because I think in corporate, and I know my experience has always been, we've had to prove ourselves day in and day out. And so if there is an unrealistic expectation and we know that we're being set up for failure, we don't even want to put ourselves in that situation. Are you seeing kind of that same thing related to hiring gaps? And what are the employers like looking at, and what are they not looking at when it comes to those hiring gaps in their job postings?
Yeah, and just one thing, I love that you're doing that. First, I haven't even done it myself, and it's my job. I always look at jobs as well. I love that you've done that, and there's a word you used. I just think it's really important as well from company to understand that, and sometimes they forget they are being evaluated as well. When someone applies for a role, when a woman applies for a role, it's not just the company hiring a person or hiring a woman. It's also the person, or the woman, evaluating the company, and sometimes it's being forgotten. So I think it's really important. And what you mentioned, and to answer your question, I think there's a big issue right now when you read posting and you mention, a lot of things were missing, or things were unclear, and we are seeing a lot of ambiguity in job description. And when you take that from a woman standpoint, women are much more likely to ask themselves question around, what am I walking into here? Pretty much, like, I don't,
Yes.
the salary information, I'm not sure there's any flexibility at all. It doesn't even mention growth opportunity. I don't see any signal of culture, or like inclusive culture. So it really creates that uncertainty that you mentioned, and uncertainty in a disproportionate way pushes women away. There's something also, big gap I'm seeing, that there's a tendency when company write posting around describing the ideal candidates. You were mentioning someone, Claude was telling you, it looks like it's a 3 role in one, looks like a senior role even. So they are just describing, and they keep describing like a unicorn candidates instead of trying to describe a realistic candidate. And we all know that women often apply when they feel they meet most, if not all, the criteria listed in the job description, whereas men will apply. The stat is actually 60%. So if men see a job description, job posting, the long list of requirements we just mentioned, and they feel like they fit 60% of them, they will apply. Women, we're much more closer to the 100%, like 98, almost 100%, of meeting every single requirement that's listed there. Huge. It's very important. And also, culturally, language matters as well. When you have words in a job description that's, constantly mentioned, availability, or, in sales, like you need to be an aggressive salesperson, or, aggressive performance of some sort, or very rigid in office expectations, like no flexibility. Women will interpret that as a signal that, maybe caregiving realities are not there, work life balance won't be respected. We're thinking a lot when we analyze job description. We go try to understand, what's the meaning behind all this, way more than men, for example. And that's especially important because women in Canada, like in most of the world, continue to carry the most caregiving responsibilities, right? So the companies right now that I'm talking to that are successful in attracting female talent are the one who reduce ambiguity and build that trust upfront. They don't wait until they have someone on the phone or on video interview. They are being forthcoming with, this is the reality of the job, this is the reality of the flexibility, this is our culture, this is the realistic expectations. Those are the most successful companies, and those are the ones who have the best women joining their workforce.
Yes. And I love that. I want to talk about the flexibility piece because I think this is something that is very contentious right now around return to office mandates.
Yeah.
And a lot of employers are positioning it as we're flexible, we're hybrid, you only have to come in 3 days a week. And when there is that expectation to come in 3 days a week, well, that's not flexible because if a woman has a sick child, or if she herself is sick, or if something happens, can you guarantee that you can be in office 3 days a week every single week, right? That it's more so that it becomes the rule, and I see it a lot with the women that I used to work with. They're having to adapt their schedules to make it in 3 days a week, even if it's a day that nobody else is in, right? Because they've had to switch their schedules. And it's the rhyme and reason around it is it just doesn't make sense. So I know that there have been countless articles around how this has impacted women in the workforce in the United States. It's pushed out a lot of women because it's just unrealistic. What are we seeing in like of how that's landing with women in the workforce even here in Canada?
Yeah. First of all, it's really true what you say. Flexibility, I find that it has become a retention strategy, especially for women. So, what's interesting in what I'm seeing in research is it's very interesting because women's preferences are actually quite nuanced. We've seen from our survey, most women have returned to the office full time. We've seen a lot of changes over the last year. A lot of companies have mandated return to the office full time. However, the vast majority still strongly favor flexibility because of everything you just mentioned. We still have 25% of women who would prefer to work fully remotely, not even, the 3 days in, 2 days out, 5%, so one fourth. When we ask the why around it, it's not just, about avoiding offices on its own. It's really about the autonomy or the lack of autonomy if you return to office. What you just mentioned, very true. Like women are, usually balancing caregiving responsibilities, there's the mental load, the career growth, which is harder for women, everything at the same time. So when organization remove flexibility entirely, many women will interpret it as this company or this workplace I'm in right now isn't designed for the reality of my life. Maybe it's more designed for the reality of, other like men, for example, in the workplace. So that's a strong signal as well, the type of signal it sends to women. And there's also a strong well-being component. We've gotten to the point of discussion about the mental health. And we have 3 in 5 women who report experiencing mental health issue, with burnout being one of the top concern. 3 in 5 in Canada.
Wow.
It's huge. It should be zero, but like 3 in 5. So, like rigid return to office mandates, like we've seen over the past year or so, it can sometimes feel like less like culture building and more like a rollback of progress, especially for women.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Because the things that we have to manage throughout our working lives, whether it's The caregiving responsibilities are usually what come to mind, whether it's children or aging parents. But then we also have the various fluctuations that we deal with our hormones and the stages that we go through. And some women are suffering from debilitating symptoms like or diagnoses like endometriosis, adenomyosis, which makes it impossible to
Mhm.
be in the office. And then you have women who are at the peak of their careers going through perimenopause and navigating the fluctuations there. And you're right, corporate was not built with women in mind. It's you come into the environment that was created originally for men and hasn't really shifted much over the decades, other than we finally got to a point where we had some flexibility even before the pandemic. And there was more of an appetite for people to work from home. And it does feel like we are rolling back into, like, teen 80s corporate life where everybody was in office. You had to
Mhm.
be in at a certain time, you couldn't leave until a certain time, and that's infuriating because the world today looks very different than it did back then even, and that to know that the workplace isn't progressing to meet the needs of the current workforce,
Mhm.
it's so disheartening.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. We're hoping to see progress, and then sometimes, unfortunately, we're or priority companies are shifting as well. At some point, to your point, we thought we were going in the right direction a couple of years ago towards like the pandemic. What's really interesting as well, if just a second more on that, is that when we were looking at companies' performance during the fully remote days, when we were looking at those, for example, companies in the stock market or even company who are publishing their performance, it was actually stronger. They were
Yeah.
making more money. People were performing better, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes, so
hard
where's the logic?
it's hard to find a justification. There's some we'll say corporate justification, but I don't think it's looking at the well-being of the employees at all, you know?
Yeah.
Um, hopefully there'll be a a bit of a wake-up call sooner rather than later, and that's what we can hope, but yeah, definitely feels like a rollback here.
Yeah.
Mm.
And, at the same time that companies are rolling us back into the past on corporate policies, there's
Mhm.
also this talk about everybody needs to innovate. We're bringing in AI and we're seeing AI embedded in most companies in different ways. And one of the most known ways is that it's embedded in the screening and sorting of candidates. For better or for worse, people have very strong opinions both ways about it, and we know bias gets baked into it. Like, we know there's bias in the models. We've seen a lot of articles about companies where this has gone very badly. So, from where Indeed sits,
Mhm.
is there any real movement towards fixing that, or is
Yeah.
it still largely unaddressed?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
There's movement, but it's still quite early, I would say. I think from where I'm sitting and what I'm observing is that the biggest shift is that employers are finally recognizing that AI isn't neutral by default, and that AI reflects the data and the hiring behavior it's trained on, right? So, if historically in companies there were patterns, hiring patterns that favored certain groups, the AI will unintentionally reinforce the same pattern, right? Because again, there's a human behind that AI. The AI doesn't decide, right? We are
Yeah.
giving AI the information to work on. So that's kind of like the gloomy side of things. But what's encouraging, at least I hope it's encouraging, is that there's more pressure now for transparency and accountability from companies. So, earlier in the year, in January, Ontario, we have a new AI law in Ontario around disclosure requirements, and hopefully it'll be brought into the rest of the country. But that really shifts towards a more responsible AI in hiring. So there's a lot of talk about, being transparent in the hiring process, in the screening process. How do you actually operate those with AI? And I also think that we need to widen the conversation, there's the bias in the algorithm, but it's just like beyond just removing it. It's technology, even the most perfect one, cannot fix unclear job requirement. AI is not going to do that. AI is not going to fix unequitable hiring practices, AI is not going to fix the culture where certain groups, amongst them women, don't feel they belong. This is not
Yeah.
AI that's going to be doing that. That's the human, sitting at the corporate level, right? So
Yeah.
technology is and should support better hiring decision, but it is not replacing the responsibility of the corporation. And when we look at women and how they view technology in hiring, they are what I would say cautiously optimistic. Almost half of them, they believe that technology could actually positively impact their work-life balance. And they even said that it will, or it is actually already reducing repetitive administrative work. So there is opportunity, but the trust around it and the trust around the use of AI in hiring will depend on whether companies are using AI to expand access fairly or simply automate old biases faster. That's in corporation hands. That's not in AI hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope they make the right decision
I
in that case,
no,
because it
but
is
yeah,
it is a powerful technology.
it is.
And I think a lot of focus right now is on automation for cost efficiency, but I like the lens of corporate responsibility and maybe even having a statement around their positioning on appropriate use of AI. And I
Yes.
do like that you brought up that law because I have noticed in job postings where companies say they use AI for screening, and I've noticed even companies that say they don't. And even that has made me interested in saying, I want to apply for that just to see if my resume actually gets
Go
seen.
through?
Yeah, because with AI, everyone's getting rejected. Everyone's getting rejected, according to LinkedIn. Everybody on LinkedIn is like, cannot get through the AI, cannot get past it, getting rejected like with immediately. So just, when I see that, it actually have more of a positive feeling towards a company that says that they're not using AI in the hiring process
Interesting.
versus those that are. And I am a big advocate for using AI, but using it in the right way and that in a way that does not cause harm or disenfranchise people.
Yeah.
So that's why, right? It's like it was a breath of fresh air to see a company saying we don't use AI in the hiring process.
It's interesting. And the goal, even when you talk to companies, they are seeing that the end goal is to free time for recruiters to actually have those human conversation. They want more time for recruiters to spend connecting with candidates. But to your point, if more are getting screened out, then where are those people I can interview, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to stress on the corporate responsibility because something that's I would say bothering me a little bit when I read articles or when I listen to corporation talking about the in the news or so is we almost talk about it's the AI responsibility. It's like, will AI replace my job? Will AI do this and do that? The answer is not will AI do it. Will the corporation allow it to happen?
Yeah.
So depending on how you decided to leverage it in your, we're talking about hiring here. If you want fairness, there's AI could be your best friend in hiring in the most possible fair way to give equitable chances to men, women, or other underrepresented communities. But it's up to the corporation to build that AI in the way that it's as unbiased as possible or as fair as possible. And I think it's very important to talk about it because it really bothers me when we say it's a AI issue. I don't think it's an AI issue. It's the accountability issue.
Yes. Absolutely. It's the people making the decisions
The big
on
one.
how it gets used and what the acceptable use looks like. And if
Exactly.
they're evaluating how it is working or if it's not, right? Is there constant review around that? Because I think that's really where a lot of jobs are going to be focused on or need to be focused on reviewing and analyzing how the models that they've decided or they've decided to implement, How are
Yeah.
they performing, and are they causing negative consequences rather than the positive outputs that we're expecting? So I think, yeah, accountability is a big one. And it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out as we go forward.
I just wanna add like a positive note to it
Yes.
still, because again, I'm having just earlier today, I had a big meeting with a lot of, Canadian big corporation, and that was the conversation, and it was with, VPs and CHROs. I am seeing a strong, I would say, power force of company that, realize that at the premise of AI that maybe was a bit overlooked, there's a real willingness now to trying to do the best they can. There's a lot of laws, there's a lot of compliance as well they need to follow, but really you could really feel during that conversation that that was, like they're testing, they're trying, they're human, right?
Yeah.
So they're also, navigating a lot of changes, navigating a lot of laws, but I could really sense that they want it to be positive for everyone. It's just it takes time. It's evolving at a pace that's, I don't know, never seen before. The capability of an AI, for example, what AI can do. So I want to have a bit of a positive lens and say I do strongly witness corporation taking this at heart. There's a lot of work behind the scene as well that I think companies cannot communicate on right yet. So I'm really seeing the concern even from corporate levels and the willingness to fix. That was maybe not as looked at closely as I should have in the early adoption, but that now there's a very strong willingness in making sure everything is as unbiased as possible and is giving the best chance to job seekers as possible.
I love that. That's encouraging. It's good to hear that. So we
Right.
are getting near the end of time, and I usually like to
Yes.
end the podcast by asking this last question around the corporate playbook. If there is an unspoken rule from the corporate hiring playbook that you would like to see
Mm.
retired, what would it be and what would you replace it with?
Okay. I would retire the unspoken rule that the best hire is the person who looks the best on paper. I think many employers are still uncomfortable looking at how much hiring is driven by familiarity. A lot of organizations say they want diversity, but unconsciously they reward the same communication style that feel familiar in the email they receive, in the resumes, in the type of communication they have with the candidates, like career path that look traditional, leadership traits, but again, historically, they are associated with men. Well, as they said, like perfect on paper candidates who mirror exactly the people they already have in leadership. So the reality is bias is often more quiet than people expect. It's less about over discrimination and more about accumulated small decisions, like who gets the mentorship, who gets the opportunities, who shows me the confidence that I interpret as a company as leadership potential, and whose flexibility needs are seen as commitment issues. That's why representation amongst company remains uneven. At least it's what I do think. When we look at the percentage of women who hold a corporate board seats in Canada, we are only at 24%. I think the uncomfortable truth is that many organizations are trying to diversify outcomes without fully changing the system that creates the outcome. And so I really feel that, again, perfect on paper doesn't mean it's the right person to hire. Some of the best talent gets overlooked simply because their experience doesn't look conventional enough on the resume. For me, resume, they show the past, right? Hiring should be about the future.
Oh, I want to get that on a t-shirt. That's like a mic drop right there. Boom. Love that. Thank you so much, Alexandra. This was an awesome conversation, and I am so grateful that you gave me some time today to have this
Of
discussion.
course.
I know it will resonate with our audience, our listeners, and so thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, Lori, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Resumes show the past. Hiring should be about the future. I'm still thinking about that line because it's not just about hiring. It's about how companies see women, whether they are willing to look past the conventional path, the traditional career progression, the familiar communication style, and actually invest in who someone is becoming, not just who they've been on paper. The trust leaks at every stage in the job posting, in the salary conversation, in the return to office mandate that signals this workplace was not built with your life in mind. And the companies that get it right are the ones who stop making women prove themselves before the first interview even starts. That is the standard worth holding employers to. And now you know the questions to ask. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a woman in your network who is navigating the job market right now or wondering why her workplace keeps falling short. Leave a comment and tell me what landed. And if you have a minute, a review helps this show reach more women who need these conversations. Connect with Alexandra on LinkedIn and learn more about Indeed's research on women in the workplace at Indeed.com. All the links are in the show notes. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode. The leadership advice that got many women this far will not necessarily get them where they want to go next. This phase of your career is not about working harder. It's about working strategically by deciding which rules still apply and which ones you are finally ready to outgrow. If this conversation resonated, stay with us, subscribe to the podcast, and join me here every Sunday for new episodes. And if it gave you language for something you've been carrying quietly, share it with another woman in your network who needs to hear it too. Until next time, lead with intention, question everything, and change the rules for the better. I'm Lori Lalonde, and this is Leadership Recalibrated.